Screen. So hello again, everyone. I'm so glad you can join us today for our second part of the training in the level 2 training for RN on reproducibility. So my name is Susann Auer. I'm a plant biologist. I work with plant pathogen interactions. So I study plant diseases. And I'm doing a lot of lectures. I work with a lot of students. I'm employed at a university in Germany, and you can follow me over LinkedIn if you want to. I'm part of Reproducibility for Everyone, and we had a fabulous time since we were founded. Basically, we had a lot of funders in the past that helped us to get some, to cover some topics and be able to develop these materials. We had a lot of people helping us, so there's always a big thank you to all of them. And we are an initiative, a community-led initiative for training and reproducibility. If you want to learn more about that, we wrote a paper about this, what we are and what kind of resources we use, and please feel free to check them out here. Last time already, we had this kind of way of doing our training. I just want to remind everyone, the communication during the webinar, we would love to have that over this shared notes doc, over the Etherpad. There you have all the sections that we're going to talk about, and there's always a section on questions. And so please, if you have any questions during the training or afterwards, please put your questions there, and then we will try our best to answer them very timely. So please don't use the chat for that, because then these answers are just gone. But here in the shared notes doc, you can also read them, and everyone who's not here can also read it afterwards. We also have a code of conduct, of course, but we talked about it last time. I mean, that's clear to you, right? That we are here with our best behavior, and we don't like harassment or anything, any kind of discrimination. And if anything happens, you can contact us if that should be the case. But I don't think that we have to fear that. All right, so what are we going to talk about today? So today's objectives are to reflect on the previous learnings from you and the others. So you've filled out the survey from the last time, a little quiz that we had, and I want to show you some of the results there. And then the idea for today is to learn a little bit more about research data types and data keeping and archiving, and understand what is important for data and code sharing. So the topics today we're going to cover in this 1-hour training will be the recap from last time, data collection and archiving, organizing and sharing protocols, and then data and code sharing. And Nafisa is going to help me out with that, and she's going to jump in at the data collection stage. So from the last time, just to give you a little bit of a reminder, what is reproducibility? That comes in all different kind of forms and sizes. When we talk about reproducibility, we mean that researchers are sharing the data and code that are necessary to replicate or to reproduce the findings that they basically publish in their manuscripts. So someone else could take the same data and use the same methods and would be able to reproduce these results, come to the same conclusions. And this is what you as researcher and every one of us, what we should all strive for, to make even our own work, first of all, reproducible. So if there's some issues there and you maybe found that you had some troubles there, then it's always kind of, I mean, this is what the training is for, right? And then it's always good to kind of try to work a little on maybe some of the aspects and how you do your research in order to reach that reproducibility, because that's really the cornerstone of science, right? Each one of us has to be able to reproduce our own findings, because before we can go into the world and say like, hey, this is like the fact I found, and it's like, it means a lot. Then there's also replicability, where you have different data and the same methods, able to replicate something that someone else probably did. And then we have robustness and at the end, generalizability. So these are all different kind of flavors of reproducibility. And we try to focus a lot on kind of this part here, but we mean being able to reproduce research and science in general. So that's just a quick recap. And again, that's also from the first training we had last time. I want to remind everyone, reproducibility is not everyone, of course, right? So when we do research, we always have to build on scientific rigor. So experiments that have to be designed with a good logic in mind. There has to be some experimental redundancy. You have to have a good understanding of probability and statistics. We expect people to be intellectual honest, and then, of course, having understanding of error analysis, so that scientists are able to, after the training they got, the hopefully good training to be a scientist, they are able to kind of apply these skills and then design good scientific experiments with that. But of course, this is very complex, so no one's perfect. We do mistakes, all of us. And so every little bit helps here, and we try to go for transparent and open science as good as we can to improve reproducibility. So on the quiz from the last workshop, we asked you which elements decrease the reproducibility of research. And as you can see here, so we had this list of things that you can cross off, and the majority of people answered all of the above elements. So technical factors, study design, statistical analysis, human factors, and rewards incentives, they all decrease reproducibility. And of course, yeah, all of them do. So we showed you this Venn diagram the last time, where in blue we have the human factors here, which are often a bit of a lack of training, or maybe not reflecting on that we all have biases. Maybe we want to see the positive result, and then we only focus on this, while maybe the positive result is not the real result. So we have some bias there. Then we have, of course, the technical factors, where oftentimes we cannot really do a lot about it, but we have to be aware that these, of course, exist. And then we had the study design and statistics. Again, that's a human factor. We just put it here in a different kind of circle. And we have the rewards and incentives, which are, of course, all human factors. It's just depending on where you are in your career, you might be able to do something about it or not, right? So we usually try to focus on the training aspect, on the human factors, and we are aware that all of these factors are decreasing reproducibility, but we kind of try not to tackle everything at once, but we kind of focus on the stuff that we can control. So we ask you, considering the factors that affect reproducible research, adjustment of which one would yield the best results to improve scientific rigor on the African continent, and why? And so here I just copied a few of the answers you gave in the quiz, and I color-coded them with human factors or study design statistics, so it's like the same colors. Overall, it was very equal, so all of the 4 different fields basically showed up equally. So some people focused more on, well, the human factors are more important probably, so like here the blue answers, most people are not aware of scientific rigor, or people should be trained, or here access to data methodologies would be best for that context from the African continent. We need to work hard to increase transparency. So you see there are some of the results here that people shared, what factors they consider as the most relevant. And I mean, you have access to these slides, you can read through them, I think, on your own time. It's valuable for you to also see what have other people said. So maybe that's something you can resonate with, and you don't feel alone if you have the feeling, okay, I think this is like the major contributing factor. So there's a lot of good information here, I think. We also ask you, have you changed your data management strategy since taking our training, and what would you change? And so here we have in blue the people who said like, okay, this is the thing I changed. So some people responded, I record every tiny detail now of my research, and that's very good, like for data management, because I understand the importance of this practice. Or I'm now willing to archive my research data in open access data repositories. So in blue are a lot of the things that people said, well, I think I'm going to share to change these things, or I just did that. And then in green, people are voicing their intent. So I think I'm going to use the metadata format that we talked about last time, or data recording. Maybe someone changed storage files and all that. Again, you can read that in your own time. I think it's good to know what people have probably tackled, and maybe you find your own answer here again. So I like to see what you actually did, and I think this is a very, very great strategy to like really at least take one small bit from this training. And I just hope it's not too overwhelming for you, so you can like focus on one little aspect that you can probably change. Then we ask, which of the below elements are you more likely to deposit at a repository for your research project? And you can see here, 1/3 of the people said, well, preprints, that's something that I can really do. You had training also in preprinting now, you had some sessions on that. So I think that's a very good idea, because a preprint is always a good, more or less concise manuscript where people get the context and they get the data and they get your interpretation. So that's a very, very good strategy. And I love that basically all of these different things are crossed off. So everyone, like people really answered differently. Like some people said, well, I'm going to deposit scripts and code. I'm going to deposit the protocols. So this is really something specifically if you're a little earlier in your career and you might have a boss and you kind of have some work that you work on, but you cannot like share the whole manuscript because the work's not finished yet. If you can, I would strongly encourage you to share your protocols, and we're going to talk a little bit about this today, because then if you can, and if also your supervisor allows that, if you have developed a method and you write it up concisely and then share that with a DOI with your name attached to that, that's going to give you more exposure also for future employees, for example, for you. Yeah, so that would be a good strategy if you want to be employed maybe somewhere else at some point, or if you are applying for a different position, to kind of have your name out there already. And most of these kind of repositories where you can do that are also free, so you can use them. You don't have to pay money to do that. So I really love that people kind of use all of these different possibilities here to share. All right, now I hand off to Nafisa.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Nafisa Jadavji. I'm an assistant professor at Southern Illinois University. So this is my email address and my lab website. So my lab does a lot of research in the brain. We specifically look at how nutrition impacts brain function. And I've been part of Reproducibility for Everyone since about 2019. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you very much for having us. So next slide. So today I'm going to talk about data collection and archiving. And so we're going to look at how data is collected and how to store it. So there are different types of data that are collected depending on your type of research. So we have this table here that we have provided you with the different types of data here on the left, and descriptions or characteristics of this data, as well as examples. So we all are scientists and collect data, and we collect it in different formats. And so it's important, next slide, to determine what type of data you collect. So, and then also what is the format and the volume of this data. It's also important in terms of increasing your rigor in your scientific research. If there is data that you can reuse, so if you do a lot of epidemiological work, are there data collected by different centers that you could potentially reuse in order to decrease costs and things like that. Also, in an attempt to increase your rigor of your research, can you automate the data collection process? So are there ways where you can, have train a program or software to do your data collection? Another opportunity to increase your rigor, your scientific rigor in research, is having a standard operating procedure for data collection, so an SOP. This can then standardize your data collection across your laboratory, across different individuals, and make it in a way that the data is collected the same way consistently. So it's really important to have a plan. You know, what resources are available to you. Talk to your PI, or if you're a PI, talk to IT, other staff in the department, what equipment's available um, uh, to you. It's also important to have discussions with other people. Getting feedback, I think, is so vital in scientific research. Because sometimes, we get stuck in our little box and we think a certain way and do things a certain way. But getting an outsider's perspective enhances, I think, your science. And then looking at using local resources might be a good avenue as well. So there's different ways to store your media, or store your data. So, I think some of us have, I might age myself a little bit, but I've seen all of these different types of storage media. We have the digital tape, we have the hard drive, the USB flash drive, the CD data storage. Then we have the solid state hard drive. So all of these are ways to store your data. But it's really, really important to know that these are not sometimes 100% reliable. For example, I remember I had just finished my PhD and I had all my data on a thumb drive or a USB flash drive, and the flash drive broke. And I was just like, oh my goodness, this is awful. And luckily, someone that's very good at computers was able to recover the data, but the flash drive was gone. And so I then switched to a cloud-based storage device or storage for my data. I started using something called Dropbox, and I've been using it ever since then. So since like 2012, I've been using this Dropbox, and it backs things up to the cloud and it's available on different devices. It does cost, money every year to pay for that space, but it's been very helpful because I have never trusted USB drives ever since that incident. So, it's important to keep things in mind in terms of where you're storing your data and kind of the pitfalls of that storage. So, we have some tips, next slide, on general electronic record keeping. It's important to back up regularly. Depending on your research, sometimes it's maintaining a physical observation notebook. So something in terms of like a hard copy might be helpful. There are mobile apps that are available for this added portability. I'm a big Mac user, so I use Apple Notes a lot, and I can access that on my computer and also on my phone. So thinking about that, in my lab, we use something called electronic lab notebooks, ELNs. And because we do academic research, we don't have to pay for the ELN, which is great. But it's important to check about privacy and data ownership. Just because you are generating data that might lead, to some financial gains or things like that. So you want to double check that. There are a lot of resources available in terms of picking ELNs. There's this website that's put out by Harvard that has a big Google sheet. I'll put that in the notes document after I'm done talking, and it lists all these ELNs or electronic lab notebooks and all the different features that they have. So that's something to keep in mind. Are there any questions? I think we're doing okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about organizing and sharing protocols. So being able to find a protocol that's been established in your organism or the tissue that you're working in can save you a lot of time. it's really, reinventing the wheel takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, mostly time and money and things like that. So it's important to maybe consider checking protocols before starting on a new experiment or um, uh, new data collection. So we're we're going to talk a little bit about where you guys find your protocols. So there's a number of different places where you can find protocols. Do you want to click again, Susie, please? So you can find them from lab members. You can find them from repositories. There's something called ResearchGate. If you read papers, contacting a person that's published. So a protocol, so an expert in the field, the literature that's an example of the literature, or creating it myself. So again, this whole reinventing the wheel. So we have this example here, this tweet. So, the description of looking for a protocol, this is quite common. You find a protocol, so you look at where it is, sort of the description of it, and it points you to this reference. So you find this reference. So here we go, looking for a protocol in the 1997 paper as described in reference number 96. You go to 96 and it says as described in 87, and then there's a paywall. And so you have to pay for that article. And so it's just like, okay. So, the description can be unavailable. Next slide. It can also be ambiguous. So here's an example of what that means. So there's a paper published and it says devices were fabricated as previously described. They reference that. Then you go to that paper, so you go to reference number 8, and then devices were fabricated as previously described. Reference 4, you go to reference 4. Devices were fabricated previously as described in reference 2. You go to reference 2. Devices were fabricated with conventional methods. Now, see, this paper was published in 2009. It's now, not 2009. Now we're at 2024. So that's quite a number of years. Now, what does that mean? What conventional methods? Are those the same methods that are used today? Or were those just specific to 2009? So it's really important to, this can be really frustrating when the descriptions are ambiguous. We can go to the next slide. Next slide. So when you're thinking of writing a protocol, it's really important to write it as a reproducible method. This increases your scientific rigor. And so you want to think about when you're writing a protocol, is it's a sort of this brief, modular, self-contained scientific publication. So you have, a few sentences about an abstract, and then the methods in as much detail as possible. So there's, catalog numbers, vendor names, steps, reagents, including some expected results, safety information, looking at troubleshooting. And good ways to do this is to use protocols.io, Google Docs, or ELNs. Using Microsoft Word Paper doesn't provide you with that versioning, so that when you make improvements on your protocols, you can see that version history. And so these are some examples, next slide, of some protocol repositories. There's Protocol Exchange with Nature Research Protocols.io, which is a great resource and PLOS One. There's also bioprotocols, as well as a number of other protocol journals, like Journal of Visualized Experiments, that provide this protocol information of these protocols that are that have been used previously, and allow you to not have to reinvent the wheel. So there are lots of resources available. So I want to thank you for your time, and I'll pass it back over to Susie.
Thanks a lot, Nafisa. So you have a lot of resources here, and I didn't put the link there, but we did a specific methodology write-up course. It was deposited on an OSF drive. I'm not sure, Nafisa, if you are able to find this one. Otherwise, I tried to remember to put that link there also. So we go a bit more in detail on how to do this protocol writing. All right, now let's talk about data and code sharing. So when you have to decide what to share. So you just concluded some research where you collected data, you probably wrote some code. It's good to kind of think about, okay, what is kind of valuable to share, of course. And we think that it's really, in order to make your work reproducible, it's definitely necessary to share all of the data and code necessary to validate the findings that you talk about and you publish on, and to be able to reproduce your results, right? That was our definition of reproducibility. There might be data and code that's very valuable to other researchers or to policymakers, and you want to share that as well. And then if you are working in a bigger institution probably, or something that is very specific, and the kind of data sets that you collected are very hard for other people to collect, or the kind of coding you did is very specific, so something that cannot easily be regenerated, you definitely want to share that as well. I was collaborating a few years ago with a group in biochemistry, and they had all this huge knowledge about compounds and specific, I'm working in the plant sphere, so plant hormones. And so they were doing very extensive computing power extensive calculations. And so this is stuff that was not easy to be regenerated by other groups because they didn't have the funding, they didn't have the computing power. So these are the kind of data sets and codes you definitely want to share with others. I personally think all data sets are valuable if they are shared with the right information, and we talk about this in a few minutes. So in general, whatever kind of research you did, if it was sound, good research and your data sets are collected with a good method, I think it's always valuable to share that. So why should you share? Maybe your funders are requiring to do that. So I'm working in the European Union, and if I get funding from the European Union, they always require that I share my data and any kind of code. Maybe a publisher mandates that you are sharing your data and code, and maybe it's the ethos of your working group. That would be good as well. We know there are citation benefits for people who share their data and code, because maybe your project gets picked up in a meta research project where people are doing some meta research, and they try to collect data sets from different kind of research projects. And then you're going to get cited if you have provided this data set and you have deposited it somewhere. So that creates a lot of citation benefits for you when people do not have to specifically contact you for your data set, but when you have probably deposited in a way that other people can work with it. And of course, we want to preserve long-term access to the data. And that's not going to happen on a personal website, as we're going to see in the next slide. So how should you share? Whenever you can, you should choose an open, persistent, and non-proprietary file format. So I just gave you that example of the biochemistry group I was collaborating with. They had all these huge mass spectrometry instruments, and that came with a proprietary software from the manufacturer of these machines. And so all of the direct outcome of these machines was not open or persistent or anything. So if this is the kind of data sets you have, try to convert that into a format if you can that's more open. So something that, for example, Microsoft Word, Microsoft offers, like the docx or the pptx, or all these kind of file formats, they are not really open as well. Maybe it's better here to share an ODF or some other of these open formats that can be read in the future also. But my take home from that biochemistry example I gave you, so the output of that machine would not have been readable for everyone else who doesn't have that specific software. And so that's not a good idea to share in these kind of proprietary file formats. When you share, you should create and share documentation to enable the reuse. And how that looks like, we're going to check on another slide. You should include always data citations of the source data, specifically if you have used other sources, of course, you have to cite these people. That's also where the citation benefits then would come from. And you need to create rich metadata that really describe where your data collection comes from with all the context. So why do we want to share on repositories and not in supplements or on websites? So here's a graph where they did a study to, it was a follow-up study. What they looked like was the URLs, so some websites, some links that were published in abstracts. And they looked at how available were these links, how available were these websites still a few years after. And you can see here, so we started in 1995, and then something like more than 10 years later, you can see there's something that's called link rot. So when you click on these in this URL from the 1995 paper, it will just result in an error, in a 404 error, or that website's not available anymore. And so this is something we want to prevent. And so you should really use a data repository and not your website to deposit your data. Typically, a data repository is specialized for that kind of stuff, and they provide a persistent identifier for your data. So usually a DOI, a digital object identifier, that is unique and citable, and that prevents this link rot. These kind of data repositories provide persistent access. I have to say here, though, repositories that are not around for a long time and they are not funded anymore. Of course, we never know if they are going to be funded for eternity, right? So I just, again, an example from my research, I was working with Auer, which is a small plant, a model plant. And the US actually had this huge database collection for Arabidopsis genome data. And at some point, also due to politics, the funding was cut for that website. So everyone who was working with that model organism didn't have access all of a sudden to that data anymore, right? So we always thought, oh yeah, that's going to be there forever, but it was not, right? So of course, funding also plays a role here. But we're going to provide you some ideas which repositories you can turn to, which are around for some time already. But I just want to point that out that maybe not everything's forever. But I mean, yeah, who's using the data that we create now in 100 years? We don't know. I just want to make sure that this is clear, right? Yeah, so a data repository should provide persistent access, at least for the next coming years, longer than any kind of random website. They preserve the data, they back it up, very important. So then you don't have to do that. They manage the access to the data, they do versioning and then the licensing. Okay, so what kind of licenses do we have? So there are data licenses and a guidance on what kind of data licenses are available. You can find here on the link in the Digital Curation Center some ideas. We use as data license for the materials you see here a CC BY license. So that's one of these Creative Commons licenses. And that enables you, so when you take our materials, you can reuse them for your own use, or you can also go to your research group and you can give the same talk that I gave right now. You just have to cite the resource. You just have to cite, well, reproducibility for everyone. Susann and Nafisa were giving that talk, but then you can share that, right? So unless you forget to cite that the material is coming from us, you're really free to use that. There are also other licenses that specifically state what kind of purposes are there for that kind of data when it's shared. And then when you share code, there are also licenses for that. So if you can consider using an open source license, and there's a plethora of those available, there's some guidance here behind this link from Carl Roman and the open source initiative. So I'm personally not really doing any kind of coding, and sometimes these kind of things change. But I think it's a good idea to go to these resources and check out what of these licenses probably would be useful for you to use. So when we talk about repositories, there are basically two flavors of repositories. There are the mandated ones and then the disciplinary ones. So there are sometimes funders sometimes your research institution has their own repository. So for example, my university has their own data repository, and that would be pretty easy for me to deposit my data. So they're not so picky. They want the data documentation, but I could like take any kind of data set, larger data set I have, and then I can go to my institution, my university, and they would deposit the data for me. And you would be able to find that over this link here, the re3data.org, which is a meta search engine for repositories. So when you want to work with any kind of data sets, you want to reuse a data set, it's also a good idea to go to this website, and then you can search for data, and there are a lot of different repositories for a lot of different fields. So sometimes the funders want you to share in a very specific repository. Then we have this institutionally specified data repositories. Some institutions make you share only with their own repository. And then, of course, there are these domain and discipline-specific data repositories. So here you see when I type in plant sciences, I come up with here something that's important to my research, Gabi, the primary database. So that's about plants and about plant diseases. So that's something I use a lot. Then there's the plant metabolic network. There's also microscopy repositories and mice repositories and all kind of stuff, right? So Nafisa is working in neuroscience, so I'm pretty sure there's like 100 neuroscience repository for all kind of data sets as well, right? Yeah, so you're going to find something if you search. So the general purpose repositories that we recommend you check out maybe as a beginning are, for example, Data Dryad. So that's a curated digital repository that's free to access. And if you want to publish large data sets, then you have to pay something. There's Figshare. I think Figshare is often used for people when they want to share their presentations, which is some sort of data or research, not really research material, but it's material as well. But people obviously have used it also for other purposes. We have Zenodo. I'm pretty sure you've heard of that one. So Zenodo is very user-friendly, very easy to use. And of course, we have the Open Science Framework. These repositories all have like different kind of functionalities. Some are better than others, depending on what you want. The Open Science Framework, I think, is a good one if you are you're collaborating with a lot of people who are not at your institution. You have a good kind of maybe way of collaborating here in the OSF, and you can set your project to private, so it's not published. And then after the project is finished, and you can publish on that. So that's maybe a good option if this is something you look for. These kind of private options are also available on Zenodo. And yeah, so these are just some ideas for you that you can check out. So Zenodo now also has a GitHub integration. So if your code is on GitHub anyway, then you can integrate that with your Zenodo repository, and it's pretty easy to use. So you really have to look at these websites and see how you like that functionality and then just try it out. So when you're sharing your data, make sure that you have in the back of your mind that we want to share fair data. And fair, I mean, you've heard about that, I'm pretty sure already. The data that you share should be findable. So you should have them on a repository where people can search the repository and then they can ideally find your data set there. It should be accessible. So the file formats you use should be accessible for people to open that. There shouldn't be any kind of like lock or key to that. So the people who want to use your data, they can really do so because it's your data set is accessible, not behind a paywall or anything. Interoperable means that, again, the data format should be so that other people can use non-proprietary software probably to work with the data, and then reusable because it's well documented. So data documentation means you have good metadata deposited together with your data. And metadata are data about data. We talked a little bit about that on our first session. I just want to go a little bit more in depth here. So sharing data is good and well, but if there's no metadata, it's basically useless, right? So whenever you share data, you really have to have a document, or it's called data documentation, that details the context for this data set. And the context would be what is in the data. So for example, microscopy. We have photographs with confocal laser microscopy. That could be like, okay, what is the data? It's the definition of the data. And then we have also from the instrument, the microscope itself, for example, we have all the specific like exposure times and all that, and magnification, right? So that would be the metadata on what kind of data do you share, who generated it. So ideally you have like the group, like, okay, that was the working group of Miss Auer, for example, or maybe it was like a bunch of students, and you list names there. So you also have that kind of authorship there. Why was it generated? So that would mean you explain a little on the project. So what was the context? What was the research question? We collected these kind of microscope pictures because we wanted to find where here in the plant do we see the disease symptoms. And so we scanned the whole plant tissue. We checked the leaves, we checked the stem, we checked the roots, right? So that would be the why. Where and when was the data collected? So that would be for me, my research institution here is in Germany, in Dresden. So it would be the lab here in Dresden. And then when was it collected? Maybe that plant is specific. So in this season, the plant looks a bit different. So I'm going to write also the time, maybe was it April or something? This is when the plant is in this specific stage. So these kind of information. How should people use it, or how can you reproduce it? And then so here I would write a bit more detailed, okay, so this data would be useful to do this analysis with, or this data set shows this and that, but maybe here are some pitfalls, or maybe the resolution is not good to define here in the roots. We had some issues also, right? So that's more context. That's something, some information you would give someone else that comes to your lab and say, hey, do you have a data set on that? And then you would explain that to this person, but you just put it in writing and attach it to the data set. So you could do this in a README. I actually do this with my students. So when my students have a folder structure, we talked about folder structure in one of our last trainings. And then the README is one document that provides the context. And that README could have all the metadata in here. So specifically, that would be the title of the project, the investigator, the institution, and the date of the project. So starting maybe the date it started this time and then it ended there. Then there's a brief description of the methods for the data collection and the generation. So this is what my students also do. They have like a README and then they write this kind of meta info in there. Then a brief description of the data processing and analysis, and maybe why they processed the data that did, what software they analyzed it with. Then, because when you share data, you have them in different folders, a brief description of what each folder contains. Then, of course, if you have these different folders in our lab group, I let my students also put the dates on the folders, so I can see, okay, so that's like one of the last ones, that's one of the first ones. And then there's a file naming scheme overview, right? So that's something that I know that sounds very tedious and very kind of nitty-picky, but it's really very helpful for other people to get the right context for your data. And I personally think it's better to share a little bit more here and be very detailed oriented, because someone who's working with that, they can ignore the absolute details. But if someone is not able to make sense of your data because there's one tiny detail missing, then maybe that's the reason why your data set doesn't get cited, right? And we want to have other people reuse our data sets. So this is how it could look like in a folder. You have your project folder, and then there you have all the different data sets. Here, these are some Excel files, the data dictionaries, and then the README project file. And this might look familiar if you have, well, again, I'm aging myself also, just like Nafisa did. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but like back in the days, or maybe around the 2000s, still when you downloaded some software, it came with a README file, and then you had like all these different like packages kind of for the software. And at least that's what I did. I read through the README. There was like the installation requirements and all that. And after I read that, and like, okay, this is how I have to install it. Then I like went on installing that. So this is like, it's an old concept, right? It's around for a long time already. So if you want some inspiration and more resource on data documentation, feel free to visit that link here. There's some great information in there. And whatever you do, as I usually try to say, start small, like come up with a plan, have some ideas how you want to do that. It's really, really crucial that you make a plan for this kind of data documentation collection. So if you're working in a team, you should probably designate someone to document the data collection. Here in our group, it's like this. I have my professor, who's my kind of boss, and then we have technical assistants. And so when I'm coordinating a project, then I train the technical assistants I work with a little bit on the data management, and I encourage them to share this kind of metadata with me, like how they collected the data, what kind of methodology they used, and all that. And then when they are finished with the project, like right now we have a project finished that we're just writing up. And so next week I meet with one of my technical assistant colleagues, and we are going to go over the data handoff. So I asked her to please also provide some more information on some of the methods she did, which I'm not so familiar with. And so this is the kind of stuff you want to do timely when the data was collected, because you're going to forget that. And it's always a good idea to write it down at the end of the day, what you did, of course, like with the lab notebooks, right? So make a plan and be happy. All right, so that's it for today. We have a few minutes left. I would love if you can give us feedback, how you like the session. I'm also going to put the link in the chat again. So this is just a little formula for you, that way you can like tell us how you liked it today or what you probably didn't like. And then please feel free to, oh no, I think I copied the wrong one. Let me drag up the right one. And if there's any more questions, please feel free to just write them here in the document, and we try to go over them as good as we can. I think it was the right one. I just abbreviated this one. It should be the right one. So the link I sent you is the right one to get to the feedback slides. So thanks everyone for being here, and we are happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Susann and Nafisa. So everyone, the floor is open. If you have any questions around any of the sections that were done, the floor is open. You can ask them here. Just unmute yourself and ask your question, or you can add it to the link that was shared, and I'm sure they'll be able to answer them here, or if not here, probably after the session, so they will attend to them. So the floor is open. Yeah, we'd love to hear your comments and contributions.
So I'm just sharing in the chat again. This is the link to the shared notes doc. So this is the one which you can also access after the presentation, and then like copy the links in there so you have everything on one place. I think that's a good reproducible way of sharing these kind of things during the webinar. At least that's what we try. So I'm going to stop the screen sharing so it's a bit easier to see now.
I also posted the ELN link that I spoke about during my session in the notes documents. If anybody's interested in checking that out, that has been posted.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, no problem.
So while we are waiting on people having questions, oh, there's Howard. Oh, just unmute yourself, probably.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me, Susann?
What's your question?
Yes, the area I'll be talking about, I wanted to ask a question is the electronic ELN. Does it work in the same category as Google Drive?
So an ELN is a little bit different than Google Drive. Google Drive, you can add different documents. An ELN allows you to like it organized, it's like a lab notebook. So when you say Google Drive, do you mean like Google Docs or something, or?
What I was saying, the ELN, does it store data just like Google Drive?
I'm sorry, it's really hard to hear you. Sorry. It's like Google Drive. Is that your question?
Yes, that's what I mean.
So I think Google Drive has some different features than ELNs. ELNs allow you to like annotate pictures. I know with Google Drive, you can do versioning history and things like that. But I'm not sure what Google's policies are on data generation and things like that. There are lots of free or open source ELNs that you can check out, and depending on the needs of your research, Google Drive may suit you better than an ELN. It's really what your needs are, and Google Drive has a lot of flexibility. One of the big things about ELNs is that you're able to share it with collaborators very easily, and so that's possible with Google Drive too. But some international collaborations might be tricky. So, I mean, you really want to focus on what your needs are, and if Google Drive meets that, then that's great.
Okay, that's wonderful. I think I get the question. I get the answer quite clear. But Susan, I don't know if you can throw more light on data licensing.
Specific on the ELNs?
Yes, specifically on producing a document. If I'm doing a research, should my data need to be licensed before I publish them?
The audio is really hard to hear. Could you maybe write your question here in the chat, and I copy it to the Etherpad? Is that possible?
Yeah, Susan, I think he was talking about data licensing. If you could throw more light on data licensing.
Data licenses. All right. Yeah, sorry, I really didn't hear it. So the data licenses, when you go to a data repository or you go to the link that I shared, there's some more information about the data licenses, like depending on what kind of research you work in. If you are a medical researcher, so we had that kind of case some while back, and you have patient data and all that, and of course the data license is going to be maybe a little bit more, or you're more restricted. You cannot publish the names of the patients, obviously, right? You have to de-identify them, and it's also a little bit depending on what your funder requires, what kind of license you can attach to the data. If the person or the institution who's funding you, maybe it's your research institution, if they are fine with you sharing your data as you want, as you please, then you as a researcher can decide what data license you use. However, that has to do a little bit with the legal status of your data, basically. I mean, here we have training materials. And so we came up with these resources. We try to cite everyone that we copied something from. And so we share this data here, this kind of training material as a under a reusable license, which is free to use for everyone. But there's this CC or these Creative Commons licenses. They come in different kind of restriction stages, basically. So I'm just going to find something for you that I can post here, a link for that, so you can check that out. Of course, a lot of the stuff I find here is in German, so that's not really going to help you. I'm trying to share with you, there's also some pictures on these kind of thing with the licenses. And if you do a data management class with Esther, she has a great kind of, she knows a lot about these licenses because she's a data steward, and I'm not. But I'm going to just share this one link here that has, I hope that this is a picture you're going to see then. Complete guide to creative licenses that explains a little bit the licenses for any kind of data. So yeah, it has to do with openness. We want openness, of course, but you always have to be aware what kind of data are you sharing. Are you allowed as a researcher to share that data as open as you want to share that, right? So it's a bit of a complex topic, and I fear I'm not an absolute specialist on that. And I see here, yeah, Ahmed is also. No, you don't need to have a legal advisor, Howard, but I'm not sure what kind of data you're working with. As I said, if you have the power to decide yourself how to share it, because there's no one else in your institution that makes any kind of restrictions to that, then you can decide yourself how to share it. And of course, you should share as open as possible, right?
Thank you so much, Susann and Nafisa. I think our time is almost exhausted. I don't know if there are any other questions. Are there any other questions? Susann and Nafisa, can you still hold on for a few minutes for us? Or
Sure. Yeah, I hope that was a little bit helpful what I just said. It's a bit of a complex field, and my main message, or our main message here, was that there are things like licenses for data, and that it has to be defined when you publish a data set how it can be reused. That's what we wanted to tell you, right? So it's not like everyone can download it and use it and do whatever without citing someone. You have to define how people can use this resource, this data sets. And that's what you have to think about. And if you share your data on a data repository, that's one of the steps. When you upload your data, they're going to ask you these kind of things. And many of the data repositories, they give you some guidance. They provide you with some information. Hey, how do you want to share the data? These are the options. So you're not alone with this. If you deposit your data on a data repository, they will help you to decide on these kind of things.
That's great. Yeah, so the floor is still open if there are any other questions. Thank you so much, Susann and Nafisa. I think when people initially hear about reproducibility, it seems like a complex concept that is so new to them. But I think when you go deeper, you realize that it's just a combination of common things that we do in research, that they come together to make your work reproducible. So stuff around how you collect your data, how you report the information, how you share the information and stuff like that. They come together to make the concept of reproducibility. So not anything strange. So the idea is try to go around learning some of these concepts bit by bit, integrate them as and when you are going about your work. So it was good to hear that some of the trainees are already doing some of these things, changing how they are recording their information, willing to share some of them on repositories and etc. That is wonderful. So just the idea of learning some of these things, pick up the ones that will be easy for you to do now. And then as you go along, maybe you find more tools and resources that you can use to also make your work reproducible. So one step at a time, yeah. I think Susann was like, we hope it wasn't so overwhelming. Don't worry about that. Just learn them bit by bit, right? You can start with maybe how you record your data. I think this was quite articulated in the earlier sessions in level 1. Just start small, and then you can move on bit by bit, yeah. So thank you so much, Susann and Nafisa. It was wonderful to have you. I believe there'll be another session for this level, right? And we'll be glad to see you again. Yeah. So have a wonderful day, Susann and Nafisa. And for everyone too, thank you for joining us. We'll be happy to see you at our next session tomorrow. Yeah. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Bye.
Good rest of the week.
Bye.
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 Bye.